Hey there, guys. All right, today we are back with some more Trope Talk. This time, the first Trope Talk episode. Beginnings. Suitable enough, I would say. Before we dive in, though, make sure you go and check out the links in the description box below. I would love it if you joined the Discord and followed me over at Twitch. I'm curious exactly how she is going to cover the concept of beginnings. Like, there are so many, there are tropes within tropes here for beginnings, right? There are so many different ways to begin a story, I feel like. And she's only doing this in 9 minutes, so I don't know how she's going to cover it all. So I'm not going to make any guesses. Um, and I can't really put a name on how I begin my stories. I tend to begin my stories, I guess you could say, with man, how to really put this? I begin my stories when things are still normal, you could say. In the beginnings of, well, the fourth book I'm writing now. That one is not beginning with normalcy. That one's beginning kind of somewhat right when shit starts to hit the fan, I guess you could say. In a way. Ah, man, this stuff is so hard to put really like place because there's so much nuance and every writer is different and they all have their own like way of doing things and way of seeing things. So like, yeah, but let's dive in.
Hey guys! So in case you haven't noticed, it takes me forever to actually make a video. The real time sink is the drawing, as it can take me several hundred frames to make a 10-minute video. I'm getting faster, but I don't want to deprive you guys of my fabulous voice for potentially months at a time, so I finally set up something I can do quickly.
You're just stealing my format.
How'd he get in here? But yes, I am shamefully stealing the podcast format, but because history's boring, I'm going to be talking about something
I already love this episode.
something near and dear to my heart. Cliches. Well, tropes, cliches, recurring themes, etc. All the building blocks of modern literature and where they came from. Frankly, I'm surprised I didn't do this sooner. This is kind of all I talk about. So, with no further ado, welcome to Trope Talk. So, as is only appropriate for a first episode, let's talk about beginnings. How does a story generally start? Well, generally, something has to go wrong. Not always, but a lot of the time. We call this an inciting incident, although inciting incidents don't actually have to be bad, they just have to be something. Whatever it is, it launches our protagonist into the plot. Now, this isn't really a trope on its own, it's just a thing, and it's not even a thing that always happens. Try finding the inciting incident in Lord of the Rings. Is it Frodo agreeing to carry the ring? Is it Boromir going ballistic, prompting Frodo to strike out on his own? Is it Bilbo getting the ring way back in The Hobbit? They're all turning points, but there's no single incident responsible for the story as a
Yeah, you see, that's what I was kind of alluding to there at the beginning. That's where it's hard to put a beginning for fantasy because there is an inciting incident because the way fantasy goes is it's multiple POV typically. We are like in every character. One of the things that is common, I would say, in fantasy is that largely every character, authors try and make every character, you could look at it, if you were to look at the story through their eyes, you would be able to say that they are the main character, right? You can kind of say like, oh, if we were looking at it through Gimli's eyes, he'd be able to put his own perspective on things, right? Or Legolas's eyes, or Aragorn. But what we have in Lord of the Rings and The Hobbit is the Red Book of Westmarch through the eyes of the Hobbit or whatever. The story of the Lord of the Ring, the War for the Ring, as told through the Hobbit's perspective, I think is what, something like that. So the inciting incidents in that case, if we look at it from the Hobbit's perspective, is, I would say, Bilbo's 111th birthday when Frodo picks up the ring. No. Well, that would be the inciting incident for Gandalf, I would say. Because then he spent 17 years studying in Gondor, and then he comes back and he's like, yo, you got to get the fuck out of here, or whatever. And so then Frodo leaves, Sam joins, Merry and Pippin join, blah, 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 inciting incident for them. Inciting incident for Aragorn is then the arrival of the ring wraiths to Bree. You could say, or whenever he was contacted by Gandalf to go and meet the hobbits at the inn. You could say is his inciting incident. I can really only talk about this from a fantasy perspective. And then the inciting incident in Star Wars, Luke Skywalker's inciting incident is when he comes across old Ben after being jumped by the Tusken Raiders. No, you go further back. The inciting incident for him is when R2-D2 runs off, I think it was. And then the inciting incidents for R2 and C-3PO are when Princess Leia gets captured. Inciting incident for Han Solo is when Luke and Kenobi walk up to him at the bar in Mos Eisley. And yeah. So yeah, inciting incident is different for each character pretty much. So each character has like their own beginning to the story
as a whole, but sometimes there is, and when there is, you can generally tell immediately. In a rom-com, the inciting incident is the meet cute.
Okay, yeah, as I was kind of saying here, each genre has their own kind of thing. Like, fantasy is going to have like inciting incidents for like pretty much each character because each character is going to be integral to how the story develops or whatever. For like rom-coms, they have their own internal tropes that work for that genre.
Detective stories, it's the protagonist getting the case. In YA dystopia, it's the hero's living situation abruptly becoming even shittier. Point is, something specific and easy to isolate tends to happen. But why? Well, it seems like it should be obvious. Most interesting stories are about characters coping in some way with a situation they're not totally familiar with. You shove the character out of their comfort zone, and then they react in ways that they wouldn't do otherwise. You end up fleshing out the character.
You know, that's a good way of describing a beginning, is the character getting pushed out of their comfort zone is pretty much the beginning of for any story. Their comfort zone's gone. However, then again, in fantasy, this is typically not the case. You have characters that have already lived lives where they've maybe have been pushed out of their comfort zone. Like it's always hard to talk about tropes because they like, you know, tropes have been around for so long that they've also then been played with and twisted and warped in so many different ways that then in of those selves have become so familiar to our modern reading, right? Like George R.R. Martin's works are a flip on so many different tropes. However, because of what he wrote in the 90s, that now for us living in 2022, because of the tropes that he flipped on the head back in the 90s, the stories since his work have used his way of flipping the tropes so much that they have themselves become kind of synonymous with that original trope in a way, right? Like, I can't really think of one. I can't think of a good one. We'll go with the Ned Stark, a character that seems like he'd be the main character, but then he dies. You know, that in of itself has become a trope. It's become so familiar for us that now we I think it's become so familiar kind of with a genre that it is just as familiar as the main character not, you know, getting fucking killed, you know? Because George R. R. Martin's work has become so influential in writing.
Character by seeing them in.
Does that make sense? I think that makes sense. It makes sense.
Abnormal situations. Throw your farm boy into a space opera and watch how he reacts. Reveal your barista's secret vampire lineage. Throw a party on the moon. Who cares? As long as it's interesting. Now, one of the easier ways to make this happen is to crystallize the reason for the story.
And that's a really, like, that's such a throwaway line from Red, I feel like. But it's true. Who cares? As long as it's interesting. Your story is not going to be as interesting to everyone. I think first and foremost, when you are writing, the story should be interesting to you as the writer. If the story is not impactful, it isn't something that you would want to read, then don't fucking write it. Because your writing is going to suffer, your prose are going to suffer, your passion is going to suffer, and you're going to get burnt out. Write a story that you want to fucking tell, that you're like, damn, I'm the one that can tell this story. Now, of course, how you get to the point of feeling confident enough in your own writing to be like, I'm the person to tell this story, that's a path that you gotta go on and fucking push through. It'll take time. It took me 2 years. It took me like over a year and a half to 2 years from when I started writing to then being able to start writing efficiently every single day. I used to be a passion writer where I was like, I can only write on a day I'm feeling like it. Now I write pretty much every single day, so long as I don't have a bunch of stuff to do. And I try to shoot for 2,000 to 3,000 words a day. I don't always hit that. I'm very lenient with myself, though. Still, I'm still like, you know what? As long as I can get 1,000 words a day, I will be content. My goal usually though is to hit 3,000 a day, because then that means you can pretty much write a full-length novel, a first draft of a full-length novel, within 2 months. I've written a 120,000 word story in a month and a half, in a month and 3 weeks for a first draft. So, because I was like, I'm passionate about the story, I have overcome my issues with myself and like, am I the right person to tell the story? And I'm just passionate about wanting to get that story written. Blah, blah, blah. I think that makes sense. It makes sense to me up here, and that's what matters.
Into one crucial moment. That lets you fling your character headfirst into the new situation and gives the most dramatic shift in story direction, which in turn lets your character react in more intense ways. There's a reason your vampire barista proudly discovers her powers in a moment of crisis, rather than gradually realizing that her stare can hypnotize the weak-willed. It's an easy way to tell the story you want to tell without having to spend too much time on the setup. Establish reality, tear it away, an easy 1-2 punch. But that's not how all stories work. It's just how a lot of them start. A magical awakening, a disaster or crisis, something that flips the protagonist's life on its head. But even if you are dropping your hero into the unfamiliar and recording the results, the drop doesn't have to be fast. Again, let's look at Lord of the Rings. Considering everything that happens, it actually starts off pretty slow. Frodo inherits the ring and Gandalf...
Yes, so in regards to the movies, Return of the King is my favorite, mainly because it's like the most action-packed. It's got the best moments, I feel like. Although I think Two Towers might have my favorite moments in it, in the movies, because it has the Battle of Helm's Deep, although I do prefer the Battle of Pelennor Fields over it, because of Theoden's speech, and I feel like the action was a lot, I don't know, I really like that one. The emotion there was better, although there are some really great moments in Helm's Deep, of course, you know, but like, yeah, I think I prefer the Battle of Pelennor Fields, the Siege of Minas Tirith. And then I think in Two Towers, is that when Gollum and Smeagol have their dual conversation? Or is that the one where Smeagol goes, leave and never come back? And then Return of the King is when Gollum comes back. Yeah, I think No. Fuck. See, I typically watch these movies, you know, I've watched them so much that all three blend together into one single story that I cannot remember I've watched, like, I know where Fellowship ends. Fellowship ends after, pretty much after Boromir, and the Fellowship breaks off, splits apart. That's when Fellowship ends, I believe. Shit. Damn it. Oh. Yes, because Merry and Pippin are taken. That's where it ends. And then Two Towers is them looking for like Merry and Pippin pretty much. Fuck. Oh, this is hard. I'm forgetting like where the things start and end. But yeah, Fellowship as a book though, Book Fellowship is, I do not I fucking hate. I'm gonna say I fucking hate Fellowship of the Ring as a story, as like learning the world of Middle Earth. Fucking phenomenal because it's a bunch of fucking lore dump. But as a story, I hate Fellowship so much. It was such a fucking slog to get through. Like, honestly, you might be better off just skipping Fellowship. Like, if you are not someone that likes info dump, and I mean, by info dump, I mean chapters of info dump, skip Fellowship and just start reading at the Two Towers. Like, you'll pick up on the characters there, I feel like, just fine enough. You'll pick up the story there. But yeah. Oh, man. Fellowship the movie is better than Fellowship the book. I'm saying it. I'm saying it. I'm saying it.
Gandalf recommends that he get it out of the Shire. So far, this is nothing more than a road trip with friends. But then Aragorn enters the story, bringing along a sense of depth, of vast history and far-reaching consequences beyond our merry band. But Aragorn enters the story slowly too. He's not a harbinger of plot twists, he's just initially there to help them get where they're going. Arguably, the story hasn't even started at this point, but Frodo's journey, bringing the ring to Mordor, started the moment Bilbo passed it down to him. And throughout the story, we don't really see Frodo coping with the situation he's been thrown into, we see him gradually getting worn further and further down by a burden he chose to carry, and a story like that doesn't lend itself well to a fast-paced introduction. Tolkien was telling a story on the scale of an entire world. It wouldn't make sense for the beginning event to have been built on a single character exiting their comfort zone, even though that very event midway through the Fellowship is the most important decision in the entire story. Point is, in a lot of these cases, the pace of the beginning informs the pace of the rest of the story. You start fast and dramatic, and the audience will expect the rest of the story to be fast and dramatic, or at the very least to have regular spikes in speed and drama level. When you start with a given pacing, that's basically what the audience will expect for the rest of the story. It's like your beginning is setting the time signature for the story. You can speed up or slow down, but overall, you're going to be expected to stick with the time signature you've established. Go faster, and the audience will expect you to slow down again. Slower, and they'll start anticipating drama or plot twists, anything to speed things up again. Most YA dystopia, for example, is a mile a minute, starting with some kind of nightmarish personal disaster and never really slowing down from there. Noir detective stories start slow, with an intro to a criminal case that's not fully understood or explained until at least the halfway point. Those stories advance slowly, with time devoted to the detective process and false leads as much as to the actual dramatic revelations. The pacing is established right from the get-go. In the more recent examples of the young adult discovers they have magical powers genre, is there a snappier name for that? Whatever. The story nearly always begins abruptly. Whether it's magic or bloodlines or genetic experimentation, the reveal is what kicks off the story and it never slows down from there. You might have noticed how many of those stories include some kind of, now that you know what you are, they'll be looking for you situation-y thing. That's an easy way to keep the pacing up. You now have an endless supply of bad guys to throw at our mysteriously empowered hero. Throw in a similarly empowered ally character who already knows the ropes, and you've got a perfect recipe for every young adult discovers they have magical powers story ever. That really needs a shorter name. But that's not the only way to throw your character into a world of magic. For a subversion, let's look at what should be the example of a young adult discovering they have magical powers story. Harry Potter. Sure, Harry learns he's a wizard in a dramatic and memorable moment, but then, well, then he goes to school. Sure, wacky stuff happens at school, but apart from the whole Voldemort thing at the end, book 1 is a pretty chill story in terms of pacing. Rather than throwing Harry into a world he doesn't understand because there's no time to explain, the whole point of the book is to explain. He learns about the wizarding world just like we, the audience, do. And the beginning informs that too. Well before Harry officially learns he's a wizard, there was a solid week of clearly magical mail telling us pretty much exactly that. Even before that, there were explicit incidents where Harry used magic without knowing it. Hell, the prologue straight up tells us that Harry's a wizard. The story doesn't surprise us with the whole "you're a wizard, Harry" thing. It's just there to momentarily throw him off balance while we properly segue into the magical world. And for a classic example, the Iliad's first line is a masterful bit of foreshadowing for both the tone and the pacing of the rest of the epic. The very first word translates to wrath. In between all the special effects and the crazy amounts of dying, this is a book about the wrath of Achilles and the destruction he caused the Achaeans. The storyteller basically warns us that what we're about to see are consequences. The intro is slow and portentous, and the story likewise is slow and tragic, laced with foreshadowing that Achilles' quote-unquote best friend Patroclus is going to face consequences for Achilles treating a war like a playground squabble. It's a perfect example of a story leading with an example of the pacing it'll be treating as the baseline for the rest of the story. But here's the thing. I'm wrong. This universal rule has been subverted like crazy in the past
Exactly.
decade or so, and now nearly every story has some dramatic hook in the beginning of chapter 1, whether the book is a fast-paced adventure story or an essay on the benefits of coming into your own as a woman. So, why the hell is that? Well, speaking as an internet content creator, it's because the number one lesson we're all taught these days is to grab your audience by the eyeballs and don't let go! Good God, man, do you want to fade into obscurity? Everyone's taught
Yeah.
that art is an arms race, and if your elevator pitch isn't the most eye-catching thing in the room, your audience will drop you like the British pound. The fact of the matter is, writers are taught not to trust their audience to have the attention span to get past page 1 unless somehow convinced that the quality of the entire book can be accurately represented by the prologue. In general, to guarantee a decent-sized audience, you do need to provide your reader with things you hope they find interesting, but as assumed attention spans have shrunk, the space you're told to fit those things into has gotten smaller and smaller. Lord of the Rings attracts your attention not with anything dramatic, but with a finely crafted sense of peaceful ambiance and the faintest hint that something is rotten there. You want to explore the beautiful world Tolkien creates, but you're also curious about the hinted darkness, the ring, and the not entirely good effect it's been having on resident old guy Bilbo. Well before we get elves and dark lords and reforged swords and stuff, we get a pleasant and peaceful environment and the faintest hint of future plot twists. Picking up the pace a little with Harry Potter, the prologue has 2 wizards drop an orphan on a doorstep and tell us that big things are waiting in his future and dark things lurk in his past. We know that bad stuff just happened, but we're not entirely clear on what, and we know that just by existing, this kid is doing something cool. But as the amount of entertainment has exploded, thanks to the internet, love you boo, there's been this sense that the competition for the audience's attention has gotten a lot more intense. Which is weird because, frankly, there's no universal audience. Audiences construct themselves. If you write a book, not everyone's gonna want to read it. Doesn't matter how good you make it, it's only gonna be up a few people's alleys. Not to go meta or anything, but when I started this channel, I wasn't trying to scoop up as much audience as I could. I wanted to make something useful and interesting and funny for the small percentage of the population that'd find it useful and interesting and funny. If I wanted high sub counts, I'd be making Let's Plays or AMVs or something, but that's not the point. It's never the point.
What's funny is back then, yes, Let's Plays would have been the way to go, but nowadays, Let's Plays are not the way to go for views.
When you want to make something, you recognize that you're making it for an audience. You're not in competition with the other artists making stuff for that audience. You're all working together to provide a space of entertainment. That was a bit of a digression, but anyway, the point is, the idea that your book has to win is weird, but there's been this arms race in shrinking the size of your story's hook, from the first few chapters to the first chapter to the first page to the first line. It's a bid to grab an audience that might otherwise close the book and move on before you get to the good stuff. And I get it, but in a sense it's draining the meaning out of the beginning of the story. It's like now prologues serve the same purpose as the book jackets. A blurb to get you invested. I read the book jacket! I'm already invested! But the other side of this—
You read the book jackets? People do that? Not gonna lie. I kind of just look at the cover and I'm like, oh, that looks cool. And then I do read the blurb a little bit. No. Well, sometimes the blurbs have spoilers on it. I think the blurb for the Poppy War, the first Poppy War book, technically has a spoiler on it. I mean, it becomes obvious within the first act that this is a thing. But I don't know, it probably becomes, if I'm remembering right, it becomes a little bit more obvious sooner than that. But if I had read the blurb right at the start, and then the moment I read the first chapter, I would have been like, oh, I've been spoiled on this thing on who this character is or whatever, right? I don't like reading the blurbs because of that. So I kind of do judge a book by its cover, and kind of also on what I've heard about the book through word of mouth online. Oh, I see a bunch of people talking about this book, I'm gonna go check it out. That's how I got into the Poppy War. I didn't read the blurb. I heard a bunch of people saying, yo, this book is amazing and it's Asian fantasy. So I was like, oh shit, I'm gonna check it out. And I checked it out and I fucking loved it. One of my favorite series now of all time. It's in my top 5. So that's how I got into John Gwynn's books. I started with his Shadow of the Gods. And then because of what I had heard online about it being a good, really cool, epic Norse fantasy. And then because of that, while I was waiting for Hunger of the Gods to release, I went and got his Faithful and the Fallen series, that 4-book series. Fell in love with that. I fucking cried with the 4th book. And Evan Winters, the Burning series. So far only 2 books, and then I'm waiting for book 3. I'm really excited for book 3. I heard good things about book 1, so I checked out book 1. Fucking fell in love with book 1. I read that thing in 4 fucking days, and then I immediately went and got book 2. Fucking finished that in 5 days. So I don't read the blurbs. I just kind of one, judge a book by its cover, and two, like, try and pick up things, hear good things about books online without getting it spoiled for me.
This arms race is that the audience is taught to make snap judgments on entire books. And frankly, that attitude is not backwards compatible. It's why people get bored with the classics. And frankly, it's why I do all of this. Once you know the story is interesting, you're willing to read it because you know there's...
Exactly, and that's exactly what I do. Like, once I know this, like, if I'm hearing the story's interesting from a bunch of people, I'm going to pick it up, right? Hence why libraries are important. That way you can feel guilt-free about going and checking out a book for free. You read it, and you're like, oh, I didn't like that, but at least I didn't spend money, so you then go and just return it. Or you pick up a book, and you're like, damn, I really fucking love this book. You go and return it, and then you're like, you go to a bookstore, boom, you buy it. And you're like, whoa, now you have it for your, and like you can reread it as many times as you want, you know? That's why libraries are cool. And that's also why Z Library getting shut down is fucking stupid. That shit was useful. Saved me thousands of dollars during college.
There's good stuff in there, but the guy who wrote down Journey to the West 500 years ago didn't sit down with his ink set and think, how do I make this opening line snappy enough to get that younger demographic invested in this allegory for enlightenment? We're taught to read like we're window shopping, that if we'd enjoy reading it, the book will just let us know right out of the gate. But if you look at the classics, there's a ton.
Exactly, which is why I recently read through this book by N.K. Jemisin for 5th season. It was called The 5th Season. I did not... the book was not up my alley, but I had heard good things about it. You know, it's a well-written book, but because of the way the story is told, is not my cup of tea. And I pushed through, like, you know, and it didn't have a snappy hook. You know, it really didn't. But, you know, I still gave it a shot, despite that. Mainly because I did buy it. So I was like, I didn't get it. I didn't get that one from the library. Like, oh fuck. But yeah.
Ton of really good stuff buried under very slow introductions. The sheer volume of entertainment we have access.
Yeah, N.K. Jemisin's 5th Season is a very slow build kind of book, where you're kind of uncovering pieces of information, and then by the end you understand most things, and you realize a lot of things. But for me, you know, I wasn't. You don't get invested in the characters for the 5th season, in my opinion. I wasn't at all, honestly. Care for any of them. It was more of a world building book. Set up the world so you understand the world and the magic system, and then I'm assuming I'm probably never gonna read them because, you know, it wasn't my cup of tea. And that's no fault on the writer, right? No fault on the author. Just some people tell stories that you aren't going to get invested in, and that's okay. There could be this popular story, and it's just not for you. That's how it goes. I do believe you should still give them a shot. Could be surprised, right? But anyways, what was I saying? Whatever.
Access to these days is staggering, but the explosion in content and accessibility is kind of...
Oh yeah, slow build. Yeah, it was a slow build book, and I'm assuming that the sequel, the other two, I think it's a trilogy, the other two books in that series that the 5th season is a part of, probably is more focused on the characters and making you enjoy them a bit more. But for me, I just couldn't connect with them, and that just makes me uninterested in wanting to continue.
Kind of created a pressure that makes it harder to enjoy a lot of that content. Thanks a lot, internet. No, but really, thanks.
Okay, so that was Trope Talk Beginnings. This was a good one. I think this is definitely a good starting episode for this series. This episode is several years old now, like 6 years old, I think. Quality still holds up, I would say. But yeah, that's Trope Talk Beginnings. I hope you guys enjoyed. Remember to hit that like button and subscribe for more. I'll see you guys in the next video. Peace.